Welcome to the Weekly Takeaway, what you need to know from the news. And this week we could probably say it like this, what you have probably not heard in the news. There is so much news happening in our world, and it seems like it's happening on just about every front. And if you watch the news or you get on social media at all, you have probably been fed more news stories about single topics than you could possibly any longer endure. But there are other things going on in the world, and I want to share some of those with you today. Again, the big stories, we're still dealing with the coronavirus. We're still considering all of the fallout from the George Floyd incident and the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. These things are happening. You are receiving all that information, but I want to share some other things that are happening with you and a couple of great stories that I would like for you to be aware of. Good news for the faith community, and it's always interesting in times like these to consider the fact that there is still good news. We'll look at a good news story. Also, we know that churches are going back to in-person services. We'll look at some of the consequences of that. And then one of the unintended consequences of COVID-19. And there are many, but we'll talk about one this week. And I'm happy to share these with you. Our first story today, good news for the faith community. There is a story on the ChristianHeadlines.com website, and this is a website that has many stories from the Christian world. The story is titled, Trump Executive Order Provides $50 Million to Advance Religious Freedom Worldwide. What an important story, one that we're not hearing, and one that until I started digging, I didn't know much about. But our president signed an executive order providing $50 million to advance religious freedom. I want to read a little bit of this story again from this is from ChristianHeadlines.com. Calling it a moral and national security imperative, President Trump issued an executive order Tuesday providing $50 million to promote religious freedom around the world and to pressure countries that are the worst violators to change their policies. The order provides at least $50 million per fiscal year for programs that advance international religious freedom, according to the order's text. The State Department and USAID, an agency of the federal government, will decide where the money goes. Here's another quote. Such programs shall include those intended to anticipate, prevent, and respond to attacks against individuals and groups on the basis of their religion. Now, we've talked about this in the last couple of weeks, but we know that, again, one of the stories not often covered is the continuing religious persecution around the world. Christians around the world in places many of us have not ever heard of are enduring extreme persecution. And this is interesting to me as an American. We are going through just some crazy things in our own country, and sometimes it feels like we're being persecuted. But real lives are at stake around the world for simply being Christians and worshiping God as they see fit. And our president has stepped up and provided some aid to help those who are dealing with this persecution to find religious freedom. And I'm thankful that he has. This is a good story. And in spite of all of the things that are going on in the world, the takeaway from this story for me is this: the faith community continues to press on. I know at times it can seem very hopeless to experience the things that we're experiencing, and particularly as those from the faith community to consider much of the persecution and some of the difficulties even right here at home. But the faith community pushes on, and God continues to provide, and what a wonderful truth and a wonderful story that is. The second story I'd like to present to you today, again, one you may not be thinking about a lot this week. Maybe you are. I don't know where you're coming from on this. But the title of this story, found on ChristianPost.com, is this: 5 Early Findings from Churches that are Regathering. And this is an interesting article. 5 early findings from churches that are regathering. Again, if you're plugged into the news at all, you know because of stay-at-home orders tied to coronavirus and COVID-19, churches across the country had to cancel in-person services. I've talked about this often. One of the great things I think that's come out of all of this has been to see the church find creative and innovative ways to continue worshiping and preaching and sharing the good news of Jesus, and seeing many folks come to Christ as a result. It's been an amazing thing to watch, but there is the missing component of the in-person services. And now across the country, opportunities are opening to worship, and many folks are coming back to actual buildings and worshiping in person for the first time in several months. But this is not without some consequences. And I read this article, I started laughing a little bit as I was reading it. Tom Rainier, who studies churches and things that happen in churches, he wrote this article, 5 of the early findings from churches that are reopening. Here's number 1. Most churches are cooperative with local and state officials and desire to comply with their guidelines. And this is good news. This is one of the aspects of this that I appreciate. Most churches, this is not what you see in the news, generally speaking. Generally, what you see is churches flaunting the government, saying they won't listen to the guidelines that have been issued by their officials. But most churches are cooperating with local and state officials, and I think that's the right thing to do. Again, as the states grapple with what to do, allowing businesses to reopen and gatherings to happen, churches get caught up in some of that, and many churches are saying we want to participate, we want to work with our local governments to make this happen. And they are. Second finding, early attendance is significantly lower than pre-quarantine era. Early attendance, that's people coming back right now, right away as things are happening, is significantly lower than the pre-quarantine era. This is something that most churches, I'm sure, anticipated. Even within our own church, we've talked about this. Here's what he says. At this point, 1/2 of the churches we have surveyed have an attendance of 60% or less than pre-quarantine numbers. We rarely hear of a church that has an attendance of 80% or higher. For now, those churches are the outliers. 60% or less is the average of in-person attendance. Now, this is interesting, but it doesn't tell the whole story. As churches open up, people are coming back, and many folks, for health reasons or family reasons or whatever the case, aren't able to come back. 60% are, however, and that's a great number. When you consider how much of an investment churches have put globally and certainly nationally into online service platforms. Many churches across the country are experiencing double and triple the amount of folks watching their services online as they have ever at any point in their church's history. This is a good thing. More folks are experiencing church because they can watch church at home. They can be invited by a friend on social media to watch a service. More folks right now are experiencing church at home than perhaps any in our recent history, for sure. And this is a good thing. And as churches are inviting folks to come back to a building and meet together as congregations, most of them have continued to push their services out online. And so I believe the service numbers, the attendees, those who are hearing the message and participating in worship is much higher than this would represent. But again, 60% are coming back, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. Number 3, returning senior adults present a unique challenge for many church leaders. This is something that folks have talked about. He says this: we have numerous reports that senior adults are among the most eager to return to in-person services. And this is an interesting piece of this. Older adults, less interested in using technology to watch service, they're the most excited about coming back. However, they're the ones who should probably stay away the longest. He said this: frankly, this trend is going contrary to our initial expectations. We thought most senior adults would be the last returning group because of potential health concerns, but as many of these older adults return, leaders are concerned how to minister to them spiritually and protect them physically. This is an issue that churches are grappling with, but a very real one. Again, most folks thought that seniors would stay home. They want to come, and the churches are doing their best to deal with that. Number 4, this is the one that made me laugh. The negative church members and naysayers are back. The negative church members and naysayers are back. I've been around church my entire life. Every church I've ever been a part of has negative church members and naysayers. But when you say you can't meet, they can't be negative or naysay. But they're back. When the pandemic began, he says, many churches had to hit the pause button on a number of fronts and issues. One of the unintended positive consequences was the pause taken by the negative church members. It has been a blissful silence for churches. Now that churches are planning to regather, the pause is lifted and the acrimonious few are back. I guess this is one of those unintended consequences. And if you're watching and you're one of these people, a negative church member or a naysayer, just be nice. Go back with grace and everyone would appreciate it. Number 5, most churches are utilizing some type of extra service, at least for the short term. They're trying to do their best to spread people out and get them into the building all at the same time. I really appreciated this article and this study because I know how badly our families wanted to gather with other folks in our church, and I know people across the country have as well. Gathering as local congregations is a right protected by our laws, and we're thankful that it is, but doing that in the right way is also extremely important, and these are issues that church leaders are working through. Support your church leaders as they answer the questions that are being asked to the very best way to move forward. And our final story today is one that falls under the category of unintended consequences of COVID-19. We've had a few of these stories in the last many weeks. This is one of them, and I believe not a happy one. It's something that has happened, and again, we can see the long-term consequences of this. On CBN News, this story ran. It's entitled, "On Sad Anniversary, Few to Mourn the D-Day Dead in Normandy." Normandy, we know, was a place where great victory was had, but at tremendous cost. And this year, just a couple of days ago, was the 76th anniversary of the D-Day invasion of the beaches of Normandy. This is always a huge celebration, as it should be. Many, many, many lives lost in 1944 when the invasion took place, but this effectively broke the back of the Axis powers in Europe. This is one of the major reasons that the United States and its allies were able to claim victory in Europe during World War II. It's important that we remember events like this because it is in remembering the cost that was paid to provide the freedoms that we enjoy, even the freedoms of protest and all of the other craziness we're living through. The freedom to do these things was paid for with real human lives. But unfortunately this year, this was an event that passed almost unnoticed. I'll read a part of this article for you today. All too many have been for 76 years since that fateful June 6th on France's Normandy beaches, when Allied troops in 1944 turned the course of World War II and went on to defeat fascism in Europe in one of the most remarkable feats in military history. Forgotten they will never be. Revered, yes. But Saturday's anniversary will be one of the loneliest remembrances ever, as the coronavirus pandemic is keeping almost everyone away, from government leaders to frail veterans who might not get another chance for a final farewell to their unlucky comrades. And this goes on. There's a quote here from one of the folks who was there. "The sadness is almost too much because there is no one." And again, what a sad story this is, but the circumstances of the world, the global economy, the global health crisis, all of the things that are happening around the world, if we're not careful, can force us to forget events like this one, the D-Day invasion in Normandy. And when we allow the events of the day, those things that are happening right now, to push away the things that we need to remember, then ultimately what happens is we not only forget the events, we forget the high price that's paid for the liberties that we have. And as we forget what it cost, we no longer value those liberties, and they begin to slip away. Here's the takeaway. Don't let anything in life or anything that's happening right now in this moment prevent you from reflecting on the good people who went before you and paid the price for the freedoms that you have the opportunity to enjoy. So many things happening in our world. But a few stories that you may have missed in the mess of stories in the news right now. There are some very important things happening right now, but there are very important things that no one is talking about. And as I always do, I want to encourage you again. Get beneath the headlines. Figure out what's actually going on and ask the question, what's my takeaway from this story? And how do I apply that takeaway to my life? Hope you have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next time.